The laugh was what did it, one short, bright burst from the end of the mahogany table that made everyone else pretend to check their phones. It sounded like a champagne cork in a funeral home. Evelyn Carter knew that laugh as well as she knew the outline of her own hand. Graham's laugh. Her husband's. Promotion, he said, still smiling as if she'd made a joke to warm the room. No, Evie. We went a different direction. For a full beat, the glass-walled conference room held its breath. Downtown Portland pressed its palms against the windows, steel and river and a sky the color of old receipts, while 10 executives waited to see whether the woman in the navy sheath dress would cry or combust. She didn't do either. Evelyn straightened the stack of printed slides she'd brought in a leather folio, the one embossed with her initials and the company's crest, Cascade Marketing Est. 1998, a Pacific Northwest success story. She'd been here 11 years, long enough to have broken in this chair, long enough to have learned that humiliation rarely announced itself in advance. It came with catered coffee and a dial-in number. A different direction, she repeated. Her voice landed squarely in the center of the table, a paperweight. Graham's eyes flicked to the right. That was when Evelyn saw the red heels. Sienna Vale sat 2 seats down, hands folded at precisely 12 o'clock on a legal pad, face composed in that bright, unearned way that said she'd practiced in a mirror. Sienna was 28, hair that expensive shade of ginger that exists only on Instagram, wrists stacked with thin gold bracelets that made a soft chime when she turned a page. Effective immediately, Graham said, Sienna will be our new director of strategic accounts. The title Evelyn had been promised, unofficially at first, pillow talk, late-night takeout. It's obvious, Evie, everyone knows you've been doing the job. Then officially, a calendar invite labeled promotion plan EC. The work had backed it up anyway. The Campbell Industries retention. The Morrison Hotel's crisis. 40 weekends borrowed from her daughter's sophomore year. Across from her, Linda Parks from HR slid a folder forward with 2 manicured taps, as if releasing a bird. This outlines the decision, Linda said gently. The folder stopped just short of Evelyn's hand. Evelyn didn't touch it. She took in the faces instead. Bate from legal with her sympathetic squint. Sean from analytics, already aligning himself with the new gravity in the room. She considered the windows, how glass let you see everything and protected nothing. Congratulations, Evelyn said to Sienna and smiled just enough to be civil. You'll want the Campbell deck today. The latest data on loyalty churn is in the version labeled 17F. Sienna blinked. 17 versions, Evelyn said. It's a long story. Graham leaned back, lacing his fingers behind his head, a posture he'd picked up from a leadership seminar and never abandoned. We'll get you up to speed, he said to Sienna as if Evelyn weren't there. I've been walking her through the big accounts for weeks. She's ready for weeks. The words landed in Evelyn's chest with the exact weight of a suitcase she hadn't meant to pack. A brief imageless flicker, late nights, closed office doors, strategy dinners, wrote itself and disappeared. She looked at the clock instead. 9:12 a.m. She would remember that. I'll need the afternoon, she said, to transition active projects. Not necessary, Sienna said quickly, the bracelets chiming again. I've been briefed, of course, Evelyn said. She could feel every heartbeat in her wrists. I'll send you the passwords, Linda murmured. We can facilitate a handover, Evelyn. Evelyn set the leather folio on the table and pressed her palm to it, steadying. She thought of Chloe, who'd texted at 7:03, "You got this, Mom," along with a gif of fireworks. She thought of the Campbell timeline she'd refined at 5:30 a.m., standing at the kitchen island while the coffee burbled and Graham kissed her cheek, saying, "You're going to kill it." Someone's phone buzzed. A chair squeaked. The air conditioning clicked on with the soft, icy authority of a hospital monitor. Before we wrap, Evelyn said, and all heads turned because she never said anything without a point, I have one question. When did we start valuing optics over outcomes? No one laughed this time. Graham's smile thinned. That's not what this is, isn't it? Evelyn asked. Because the optics here are dazzling. The man who runs the place doesn't promote his wife. The woman who's done the work becomes a liability. The board sleeps better. It all photographs beautifully. Sienna sat straighter, defensive brightness dimming a shade. This isn't personal, Evelyn. Nothing in corporate life is personal, Evelyn said. Until it is, she stood. No dramatic scraping of chair legs, no slammed door. She slid the folio toward Sienna, who reached for it and hesitated as if it might still be warm. "You'll want the Appendix C notes," Evelyn added. "And if Campbell calls about the Phoenix rollout, they're going to ask about the Southwest pivot. Tell them we've reallocated 40% of the digital spend to Spanish-language creative." Sienna nodded, scribbling. "Got it, you won't," Evelyn said so softly only Sienna and Linda heard it. "But you'll think you do." At the doorway, Evelyn paused, hand on the glass. She could see her reflection superimposed over the city, her dark hair gathered in a careful knot, her small gold stud earrings, the tiny scar near her lip from a childhood bicycle crash. She almost didn't recognize the woman staring back, precise, calm, bones humming like a live wire. Graham said her name. Not Evie, Evelyn, it landed flat, unfamiliar. "Let's be adults," she didn't turn. "We are." In the hallway, quieter now, she took out her phones. A text notification from Chloe waited like a small, bright buoy. "How'd it go?" Evelyn typed, headed back to the office. "I'll call you in a bit." Then she added a period, then deleted it. She put the phone away and walked toward the elevator, past framed campaign posters she'd shepherded from whiteboard to market. At the glass, she saw herself again, smaller this time, descending. When the door slid shut, she exhaled for the first time in 12 minutes. Her hands were steady. Good. Steady hands could carry a lot. By the time the elevator reached 12, she decided she would clear her desk by noon. She would pack the potted snake plant, and the employee of the quarter plaques Graham kept meaning to hang on their living room wall but never did. She would hand over the keys gracefully, say the correct words. And then after lunch, after the small theater of exit, she would do the one thing no one in that room expected. She would make a list. Not of grievances. Of systems. Passwords. Backdoors. Proof. If they were going to set her on fire, she thought, smoothing the skirt of her dress as the doors opened into the hum of the 12th floor, she would decide how long and how brightly it burned. By the time Evelyn reached the parking garage, the mask of composure had cracked in 3 invisible places. Her heels struck the concrete floor in even, purposeful clicks, but her breath came in short bursts, the way it did after running up too many stairs. The echo of her own footsteps sounded too loud, like applause for a performance she hadn't realized she'd been giving. Her Volvo sat in its usual space, 3B, neat and ordinary. She opened the door, slid inside, and shut the world out. The silence pressed against her. For a moment, she didn't start the engine. She just sat, gripping the steering wheel hard enough that her wedding band dug into her skin. Different direction. The phrase looped in her mind like a bad jingle. When she finally turned the key, the radio came alive with a soft pop and an upbeat pop song that felt obscene. As she turned it off, the garage exit loomed ahead, a square of sunlight too bright for her mood. As she drove onto Burnside, the familiar streets blurred, coffee shops where she'd bought scones for the team, the corner deli where Graham once surprised her with flowers after their first joint campaign win. That had been 6 years ago, before Cascade became his playground and her battlefield. At a red light, Evelyn caught her reflection in the rearview mirror. Perfect makeup, unbroken lipstick, eyes that looked steadier than they felt. She adjusted her seatbelt and said aloud, "You're fine." Her voice cracked right down the middle. The light turned green, but she didn't move until someone honked behind her. The drive home took 17 minutes, 17 tiny eternities. She counted every red light, every stop sign, as if the numbers could steady her. By the time she turned onto Mapleton Avenue, the quiet of their neighborhood felt wrong, too pristine. Dog walkers waved, sprinklers ticked rhythmically across manicured lawns, and in the distance, kids rode bikes in lazy figure eights. Ordinary life continued, perfectly unaware. The Carters' house sat at the end of the street, a tasteful 2-story with navy shutters and a flagstone path Graham had insisted on installing himself. "Adds curb appeal," he'd said. Now it looked like an exhibit from a life she wasn't sure she still lived. She parked in the driveway, killed the engine, and carried the box from her office inside. Her heels left faint impressions on the welcome mat, "Home sweet home." The phrase made her stomach twist. The dining table, a reclaimed wood masterpiece they'd bought after her last bonus, was spotless except for one item, a thick folder marked Campbell Industries renewal draft. Evelyn frowned. She hadn't left that there. The handwriting in the margins wasn't hers. The loops and slanted lettering were Sienna's. She recognized it instantly, She'd seen it on meeting notes, bubbly and unprofessional, the handwriting of someone who'd never had to double-check herself. Evelyn flipped through the pages. Dates from 6 weeks ago. Detailed notes on her strategies, her clients. Words circled in pink ink. Jay likes this approach. Jay. Not Graham, not Mr. Carter. Jay. The intimacy of it made her throat close. Her phone buzzed. Chloe. CHLOE, how'd it go? Did you get it? Evelyn stared at the screen until the text dimmed. Then she typed, we'll talk later tonight, sweetheart. Deleted it. Typed again, busy day. Call you after dinner. Her hands trembled when she set the phone down. She looked around the house, open-plan kitchen, curated art, the faint scent of Graham's cologne lingering in the air. Every object had been part of a story she'd built, one PowerPoint deck, one late-night brainstorm at a time. The walls suddenly felt too clean, the quiet too heavy. Her laptop sat on the counter. She opened it out of reflex, the way some people light a cigarette when they're unraveling. Her desktop background, a photo of Cannon Beach where Graham had proposed, glowed back at her. She created a new document and titled it simply, List, not of grievances. Not of what she'd lost. Passwords, client logins, vendor contacts, workflows only she understood. She typed faster, each keystroke tightening the knot in her chest until it began to feel like clarity. When she paused, she heard it, the house settling, the low hum of the refrigerator, the faint, rhythmic ticking of the kitchen clock. All ordinary sounds, but they seemed amplified now as if mocking her. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Chloe. It was Tim, one of her junior analysts, a bright kid she'd mentored. Tim, hey Evelyn. Sorry to bother you. Sienna's asking for final approval on the Campbell deck. Should I send it to her? Evelyn stared at the message. For a second, she imagined replying yes, the easy, compliant response. But something inside her shifted, a cold, crystalline anger that didn't feel like rage but precision. Evelyn, give it to her. She'll need to learn quickly. She set the phone down, the tiniest smile curving her lips. For the first time all morning, she felt something that wasn't humiliation or heartbreak. It was focus. They thought she'd walk away quietly. They thought they'd taken everything. What they didn't realize, what none of them realized, was that she'd built the company's foundations herself. She knew every wire, every blind spot, every secret. And tonight, when Graham came home and asked what was for dinner, she would know exactly what kind of evening it was going to be. By the time Graham's car rolled into the driveway, the house smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and unease. Evelyn had wiped every countertop twice, though there was nothing left to clean. She de-chopped vegetables she didn't plan to cook and poured herself a glass of Pinot Grigio she hadn't touched. The neat domestic scene looked perfect, like a stock photo titled Happy Suburban Evening. The front door opened at exactly 6:47 p.m. Keys clinked into the ceramic bowl, his nightly ritual. Hey, Graham called, loosening his tie. What's for dinner? Evelyn's hand tightened around the knife on the cutting board. What's for dinner? As if nothing had happened. As if the morning hadn't ended her career, their marriage, and every illusion in between. She set the knife down, slow and deliberate, and turned. We need to talk about today. Graham exhaled the way he always did before a fight through his nose, sharp, dismissive. Evie, come on. Let's not do this now. This morning you handed my promotion to your employee, she said evenly. And you didn't think we'd be having a conversation? It's not what you think. He grabbed a beer from the fridge, popping the cap against the granite counter. You know how this looks to the board, a husband promoting his wife, it's bad optics. Optics, she repeated. You mean appearances? Yes, appearances. It's complicated, she stepped closer, crossing her arms. Is that what you call it when you train my replacement for weeks behind my back? Complicated. He took a sip of beer, eyes fixed on the counter. You're overreacting. You still have a job. We'll find another position that fits, she almost laughed. I built that company's client base from scratch. I saved accounts you couldn't keep. And you replaced me with someone who doesn't even know what ROI stands for. Don't start attacking her, he snapped. Sienna's learning fast. She's fresh, brings a new perspective. Fresh, Evelyn's voice cracked like ice. She's inexperienced, Graham. She's your project. Or maybe she's something else entirely. He froze, beer halfway to his lips. Don't do that, don't what, she said softly. Call it what it is, the air between them thickened. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the faint tick of the clock over the door. The doorbell rang. Both of them turned, startled. Graham frowned. Probably a delivery. Evelyn walked to the door and opened it. Sienna Vale stood on the porch, dressed in yoga pants and a cropped jacket, holding Graham's MacBook. Her hair was in a perfect ponytail, her smile bright and practiced. "Hi, Evelyn," she said, voice dripping with casual cheer. "Sorry to interrupt dinner." Graham left his laptop at the office. "I figured he'd need it for tomorrow's presentation." Evelyn's pulse pounded in her ears. How thoughtful. Behind her, Graham appeared, forcing a laugh. "Oh, thanks, Sienna." "You didn't have to, it's no trouble," she said quickly. "I was passing by anyway on my way to Pilates." Evelyn knew the geography of Portland. Sienna's apartment was 15 minutes in the opposite direction of any Pilates studio in the city. "Oh," Evelyn said lightly. "Well, you're practically family now." "How nice of you to drop by unannounced." Sienna hesitated, the smile wavering. "I just wanted to help." "Of course you did." Evelyn stepped back, allowing the two of them a perfect frame in the door. Graham reached for the laptop, his fingers brushing Sienna's. The contact was too natural, too practiced. Evelyn saw it, the flicker of guilt in his eyes, the relief when she didn't explode. "See you at breakfast tomorrow," Sienna said, turning to Lave. "We'll go over the presentation slides." Breakfast. The word hung in the air like a curse. When the door closed, Evelyn faced Graham. "You meet her for breakfast now?" He rubbed his forehead. "Oh, it's business." "You're reading into everything." She looked at him, really looked, and realized she didn't recognize the man standing in front of her. "I used to think betrayal was a single moment," she said quietly. "But it isn't, is it? It's 100 small ones you pretend not to notice." Graham sighed. "Evie, don't call me that." She walked upstairs without another word. In their bedroom closet, she pulled out a suitcase, the one they'd bought for their honeymoon. "Evelyn, what are you doing?" "Getting space to think," she said, folding a blouse. "Before I decide what kind of ending this story gets." By Friday morning, Evelyn's phone chirped with a new notification before her alarm even sounded. "It's system, your remote access has been terminated. Contact your administrator with questions." She stared at the glowing screen in the dark bedroom. So they weren't even going to wait until Monday. Graham's company had already locked her out. She sat up, the familiar early morning sounds of their neighborhood garbage trucks, a dog barking layering over the hiss of betrayal. Downstairs, she booted up her personal laptop, pulling a legal pad close. The kitchen felt like a command center now, not a home. Her email still worked on her personal account. She scrolled quickly, opening the most recent backup she'd made of her client files. She had 20 minutes before the system timed out. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, capturing screenshots, downloading PDFs, and zipping entire folders. Halfway through the download, she froze. A subject line jumped out: confidential, transition timeline JVSV. It was from Graham to Sienna 3 months ago. She opened it. Evelyn is too emotionally invested in her accounts to see the bigger picture. "We'll move her off the high-value clients gradually. Let's discuss over dinner Thursday." Evelyn remembered that Thursday, she'd been in Seattle helping her mother recover from surgery while Graham claimed he was stuck in quarterly reviews. The progress bar on her screen crept to 100%. She ejected the flash drive and slid it into the inside pocket of her robe just as the laptop blinked black. Access revoked. The coffee maker beeped. She poured herself a cup, hands trembling so badly some splashed onto the counter. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Mara, her older sister in Beaverton. "Evie," Mara's voice was tentative. "I saw your LinkedIn update, exploring new opportunities. What happened?" Evelyn pinched the bridge of her nose. "It's complicated. I need to tell you something," Mara said quickly. 6 weeks ago downtown, I saw Graham at Romano S with that woman Sienna, you know, the red-haired one. They were at the back corner table. It looked not like a business dinner." Evelyn swallowed hard. Romano S was their anniversary restaurant. "Thanks for telling me. I wasn't sure if I should," Mara continued. "But you sounded so upbeat about that promotion." "Don't," Evelyn said softly. "Just don't." After she hung up, she sat at the table staring at the flash drive. Her mind played the pieces back: late nights, the laptop on the porch, Pilates, breakfast meetings. The picture forming was one she'd refused to see. Her phone buzzed a third time. Tim again. "Tim, Hazel told Campbell you quit without notice." They're panicking. Should I patch them through? For a moment, Evelyn typed not my problem but deleted it. Tim didn't deserve her anger. EVDLYN, tell them the account's in transition. Be vague. No commitments. I'll follow up. She set the phone aside and flipped open a fresh page on her legal pad. Across the top, she wrote in block letters, firewall. Underneath, she began listing every backdoor, every credential, every piece of proof she still controlled, client histories, contract revisions, metadata on campaign files. The page filled rapidly. She paused, looking around the kitchen, fruit bowl, family photos, the faint tick of the clock. This was not defeat. This was intelligence gathering. Out of habit, she whispered the mantra she used before every high-stakes pitch: know your leverage. Build your angle. Graham thought he denied her a raise. In reality, he'd lit a fuse. By the time the sun rose fully over Portland, her dining table was covered in flash drives, sticky notes, and spreadsheets. Evelyn Carter, who had spent a decade saving everyone else's crises, had now become her own last line of defense, one woman building a firewall against the life she'd built with her own hands. By Monday morning, Evelyn had turned her dining table into a war room, papers spread like a crime scene, flash drives labeled with names that now sounded foreign: Campbell, Morrison, Sterling. Her coffee had gone cold twice. She was already halfway through her third cup when she made her decision. If she was going to fight, she needed allies. The first call she made was to Rebecca Lynn. Rebecca had been Cascade's chief financial officer for nearly a decade, until her mutual separation last spring. Everyone knew she hadn't left willingly. Evelyn still remembered the closed-door meeting and the rumors that followed: creative differences, budget tension, personality clash. In corporate America, all of those meant the same thing: she'd gotten too close to the truth. Rebecca answered on the second ring. Evelyn Carter. I was wondering how long it would take before you called. Evelyn hesitated. You knew, sweetheart, Rebecca said, voice husky with exhaustion. We all knew. Graham's been grooming his little successor since Christmas. I just didn't think he'd be cruel enough to use you as the decoy. Can we meet? Evelyn asked. Somewhere private. 2 hours later, they sat in a corner booth of a quiet cafe off Burnside, where the espresso machine's hiss covered any words worth keeping secret. Rebecca looked thinner, her suit hanging loose, but her eyes were sharp as ever. I'm guessing you're not here to reminisce, Rebecca said, stirring her coffee. You want proof. I need to know what happened after you left, Evelyn said. I think they've been moving money, creative accounting tied to Sienna's projects. Rebecca gave a short laugh. You're smarter than I was. I kept my head down until it was too late. She reached into her leather tote and pulled out a flash drive. I kept this. It's every suspicious transaction for the past 18 months. Hazel Vale's sorry Sienna's department has more holes than Swiss cheese. Evelyn blinked. Why give this to me? Because you still have credibility, Rebecca said. And because he made me doubt myself so much I stopped trusting my own math. I want him to answer for that. They spoke for another hour: dates, numbers, expense codes, the language of quiet revolt. When Evelyn left the cafe, the flash drive felt heavier than it should. Her next meeting was with Jennifer Park, the former head of strategic planning. They met at a public library, of all places, surrounded by the hum of old HVAC and the rustle of turning pages. Jennifer wore jeans, sneakers, and the look of someone who hadn't slept in days. Sienna's a fraud, Jennifer said without preamble. Every pitch she's ever made was plagiarized from someone she managed. I called Graham out on it, and 2 weeks later, HR told me I was creating a hostile environment. Evelyn's stomach turned. You have proof, Jennifer slid a manila folder across the table. Emails, client complaints, and my severance agreement with a very generous NDA. I shouldn't even be talking to you, but someone needs to expose them. Evelyn skimmed the documents, her pulse racing. This could bury them, that's the idea, Jennifer said. But be careful. Graham plays dirtier than people think. He doesn't just ruin reputations, he erases them. When Evelyn got home, dusk was settling over Portland. The rain had started, soft against the windows. She spread Rebecca's flash drive data beside Jennifer's folder. Numbers, emails, contracts, each piece another nail in a coffin she hadn't known she was building. The evidence was overwhelming, but something inside her trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of responsibility. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for every woman who'd ever been told to be patient, while someone less qualified got the raise. She opened her laptop and began typing, her reflection faint in the glass. She would not scream. She would not threaten. She would document. And when the moment came, she would strike, not out of revenge, but precision. It was time to turn her proof into power. By Thursday evening, Evelyn's house looked less like a home and more like the nerve center of a covert operation. The dining table was covered in folders, flash drives, highlighters, and post-it notes arranged in military precision. Her laptop glowed in the dim light, a blank email window waiting for the message that would end everything. She'd rewritten the email 16 times already. The tone had to be perfect, professional, measured, and polite enough that no one could accuse her of malice. She wasn't going to send a manifesto. She was going to light a match. The cursor blinked at her like a heartbeat. She started typing, to Cascade Marketing Board of Directors subject, urgent financial and ethical concerns. Every word that followed had to sound objective, the kind of language that wouldn't trigger legal alarms but would whisper something's wrong here. She referenced discrepancies between expense reports and project outcomes, patterns of potential mismanagement, and client dissatisfaction correlated with leadership transitions. She didn't name Sienna or Graham directly. Instead, she attached graphs, redacted screenshots, and portions of Rebecca's financial analysis, all scrubbed of identifying metadata. The evidence would speak for itself. When she paused to sip her wine, she caught her reflection in the window. Her face looked unfamiliar in the half-light, sharper, focused, less afraid. The clock on the stove read 11:17 p.m. She reread the draft aloud, her voice steady but softer than she felt. "Keep it surgical," she murmured. Facts, not fury. Her phone vibrated, an incoming call. The screen flashed private number. She hesitated, then answered. Evelyn Carter, a man's voice said, deep and measured. "This is Dennis Palmer from the Cascade Board. Do you have a moment?" Her heart stumbled. Dennis Palmer. The longest-serving board member, the one who'd congratulated her after the Campbell renewal last fall. "Yes, of course," she said, trying to sound calm. "I heard what happened last week," he continued. "Off the record, some of us are concerned. There are rumors about internal relationships influencing decisions. I can't say more, but you'd be wise to document everything." Evelyn's pulse quickened. "You're saying the board suspects something?" "I'm saying," Dennis replied carefully, "if there's truth to those rumors, ethics policy requires disclosure. Relationships between executives and direct reports must be reported to the board." "You understand what I'm implying?" Her throat tightened. "I do. Good. Protect yourself, Evelyn. You deserve better than how they treated you." The line went dead. For a long moment, she just sat there, the phone heavy in her hand. The final puzzle piece clicked into place, not just professional betrayal, but an ethics violation. Graham and Sienna's affair wasn't just personal, it was illegal under company policy. Grounds for termination. She returned to her laptop, adrenaline burning through her fatigue. The email she'd drafted suddenly felt too timid. She opened a new paragraph at the end. "Given recent concerns regarding executive conduct and compliance with Corporate Ethics Policy Section 5.2, I urge the board to review the attached materials immediately. I believe the integrity of Cascade Marketing and its shareholders depends on it." She signed it simply, Evelyn Carter, former Director of Strategic Accounts. Her finger hovered over send. This was the moment. The one that would shatter 12 years of work, marriage, and illusion. She thought of Chloe, asleep in her dorm room 2 hours away, believing her mother was invincible. She thought of Graham, asleep upstairs, or maybe not asleep at all, just pretending the way he'd pretended for months. Evelyn exhaled, then clicked send. The screen flashed confirmation. Message sent. She closed the laptop gently and leaned back in her chair. The house was utterly silent except for the ticking clock and her own pulse in her ears. Outside, rain began to fall, slow and steady, tapping against the window pane. "The fuse is lit," she whispered. And she meant it. Evelyn woke before dawn, heart pounding with the faint disorientation of someone who'd been dreaming about falling. It took a moment to remember why, the email. She descended it. The fuse had been burning all night. She brewed coffee the way she always did, 2 scoops, 1 spoon of raw sugar, but the smell didn't comfort her this time. The kitchen, once her sanctuary, now felt like the waiting room for a storm. At 7:43 a.m., her phone buzzed. A text from Tim, her old analyst. Tim, emergency board meeting called. Everyone's freaking out. Graham looks like he hasn't slept in days. A second later, Tim, Hazel, Sienna is crying in the bathroom. HR's locked out of the conference room. Evelyn stared at the screen, one corner of her mouth lifting. It had begun. Still, she couldn't look away from the window, where Portland's gray morning pressed against the glass. There was no thrill in it, just a deep, cold quiet inside her. By 9:00 a.m., her phone was a waterfall of messages. Whispers from former colleagues, snippets from panicked group chats. Board sequestered. Linda just walked out without her badge. Someone's digging through Sienna's expense reports. Evelyn opened her laptop and exhaled through her nose. It was time for phase 2. Her cursor hovered over the document she'd been refining for days. When Merit Meets Politics, a case study in leadership failure. It wasn't an exposé. It was a story, a professional essay about what happens when ambition turns blind, when politics devour merit. No names, no company identifiers. But anyone in Portland's marketing scene would know exactly who she meant. She uploaded it to LinkedIn and hit post at exactly 12:01 p.m., right when professionals were checking their feeds between bites of salad and Slack notifications. Within 10 minutes, the first comment appeared at Lisa Morales. This hit hard. I've lived this exact story. Thank you for saying what so many of us can't. Then another. At Mark Denton, merit means nothing when the boss promotes their favorites. This article should be required reading in every boardroom. By 12:45, the post had 400 likes and 67 comments. Evelyn watched the reactions spread like wildfire across her network, executives, recruiters, even journalists sharing it with captions like a brutal truth about corporate culture. At 2:17 p.m., a new notification appeared that made her freeze. Robert Campbell, CEO of Campbell Industries, Cascade's biggest client, had commented publicly, "Leadership transitions should never compromise project continuity or client relationships. Concerned about recent changes affecting our account. Would appreciate direct communication from Evelyn Carter regarding our ongoing campaigns." The sound of her own pulse filled her ears. Within minutes, her phone rang, Robert's direct line. "Evelyn, this is unacceptable," he said, voice sharp with authority. "You're the only reason we've stayed with Cascade. We need you on this account or we walk." She kept her tone neutral. "I appreciate that, Robert, but I'm no longer with the company." "Then I'll take my business wherever you go," he said flatly. "Let me know when you land." By 3:00 p.m., 3 more clients had echoed the same sentiment on LinkedIn. Evelyn's inbox overflowed with offers for consulting, interviews, collaborations. But she wasn't celebrating yet. She knew the real explosion was still happening downtown. At 4:08, Tim sent one last text. "Tim, Sienna tried to blame you. Said you sabotaged her files. Board pulled the server logs. Turns out she copied your work onto her drive months ago." Graham's face, wow. He looks destroyed. Evelyn set her phone down, trembling with something she couldn't name, not joy, not relief, but release. She poured herself another coffee and sat at her table, surrounded by empty folders and quiet. Outside, the rain had stopped. The city skyline gleamed under a thin break of sunlight. The fuse hadn't just burned out, it had reached the charge. And Cascade Marketing was about to learn what real accountability looked like. By early evening, the gray light had faded into a Portland drizzle, and the phone on Evelyn's counter buzzed like a trapped wasp. She ignored it until the vibration became relentless. It was Tim again. "Tim, Hazel, sorry, Sienna just sent a company-wide email. You need to see this." He forwarded a screenshot. Evelyn nearly laughed. Subject, setting the record straight. The message was a masterpiece of self-sabotage, a rambling declaration crediting Sienna for every major account Cascade had landed in the last 2 years. She even claimed authorship of Evelyn's award-winning Morrison Hotels campaign, complete with a screenshot that still showed Evelyn's name in the file's metadata. A minute later, Tim texted again. "Tim, you'll love this. Campbell Industries just replied, all asking for proof." "It's chaos here." Evelyn set her coffee down, her hand trembling with a mixture of disbelief and grim satisfaction. By 3:45 p.m., the fallout had gone from corporate to catastrophic. Morrison Hotels called Graham directly, furious that their primary contact had been mysteriously replaced. Sterling Communications threatened to pull their multi-million-dollar contract if Evelyn wasn't reinstated. The walls of Cascade Marketing, once a glass fortress of self-congratulation, were cracking in real time. At 6:22 p.m., headlights swept across Evelyn's living room. The car engine cut off and the front door opened without knocking. Graham stood there soaked from the rain, hair plastered to his forehead. His face was gray, drawn, almost unrecognizable. "Evelyn," he said. "We need to talk." She didn't rise from her chair. About what? Ethics violations, public humiliation, or the breakfast meetings that weren't about breakfast? He ran a hand through his hair, pacing. "The board is launching a full investigation. 3 clients have suspended their contracts. You've destroyed everything we built." She laughed softly, the sound dry and dangerous. "Everything we built? You mean everything I built while you collected the credit? You don't understand how this looks," he snapped. "They think I understand perfectly," she cut in. "They think you slept with your direct report, lied to the board, and promoted her over your own wife." "Which conveniently happens to be true." Graham's shoulders sagged. "Evie, please don't call me that," he froze. The silence that followed was suffocating, heavy with the ghosts of dinners, anniversaries, shared victories. As she stood, her voice steady. "Do you have any idea what it's like to spend years earning something, only to watch it handed to someone else because of optics? To realize the man who promised to have your back was the one holding the knife?" He swallowed, his voice low. "I didn't mean to hurt you, but you did," she said. "And you made sure everyone saw it." Outside, the rain picked up, drumming against the windows. Graham turned toward the door but stopped. "Tell me you didn't send that email." She tilted her head. "What email's the one to the board?" "Palmer told me." She smiled faintly. "So you do know about it." He took a step closer, desperation creeping into his tone. "If you cared about this company at all, Graham," she said quietly, "I cared." "That's the problem." For a long moment, neither spoke. The air smelled faintly of wet pavement and old wine. Finally, she said, "I've accepted a new position at Apex Global. Director of Strategic Marketing. They made an offer this morning." His expression collapsed. "You can't do that. You signed a non-compete, which is void," she replied calmly. "Since you violated the ethics clause first." He stared at her, the realization settling like lead. "You always underestimated me," she said, moving past him toward the door. "You thought I'd break. You thought I'd beg. But all I ever did was build, and now I'm building somewhere better." She opened the door, the rain cool against her face. "Lock up when you leave." As she stepped into the downpour, the city lights glimmered off the wet pavement. Behind her, Graham stood frozen in the doorway, the man who had once controlled her world now watching it slip away. For the first time in months, Evelyn didn't feel cornered. She felt free, untethered, alive, and dangerous. The fuse had burned clean through, and all that was left now was the fire. The following Monday morning, Portland woke under a pale spring sky streaked with soft gold. Evelyn stepped out of her Uber in front of Apex Global's headquarters, 30 stories of glass and steel that caught the sunrise like a mirror. Her heels clicked on the marble lobby floor, the sound sharp and certain. "OMS." Carter, the receptionist, smiled, already expecting her. "Welcome to Apex. Oh, Mr. Whitman is waiting for you on the 22nd floor." Marcus Whitman, the CEO, had called her himself 2 days earlier. His voice had been calm but deliberate. "We've been following what's happening at Cascade. I think you deserve better ground to stand on." Now, as the elevator doors opened to reveal a sweeping view of downtown Portland, Evelyn knew this was that ground. The space smelled faintly of cedar and new beginnings. Marcus stood by the window, hands in his pockets. "You made it," he said warmly. "I don't waste time," Evelyn replied. "Good," he said, gesturing to the corner office that was already set up for her, glass walls, a minimalist desk, and a view of Mount Hood that looked like a promise. "Director of Strategic Marketing. Your official title. You'll have full autonomy to build your team." "Any restrictions?" she asked, her tone cautious but composed. "Just one," he said. "Don't look back." Evelyn smiled faintly. "I won't." By noon, she was already in her first strategy meeting. The team at Apex was sharp, competitive, but curious about the newcomer who'd caused such a stir in Portland's marketing circles. Evelyn's name was everywhere. LinkedIn articles dissected her case study, journalists speculated about corporate politics, and 3 major clients had already requested to move their business to Apex, citing continuity concerns with Cascade. But while success bloomed around her, a new kind of tension took root inside. At lunch, she received a call from Chloe. "Mom, it's all over the news," her daughter said breathlessly. "They're calling you the woman who brought down Cascade Marketing." Evelyn stared at the reflection of the city in her office window. "That's not exactly the legacy I wanted. It's not scandal, Mom, it's justice. People are posting your article everywhere." "You started something," Evelyn smiled, but her chest ached. "Justice doesn't always feel good, sweetheart. Sometimes it just feels heavy." That night she stayed late at the office, reviewing client transition reports. A knock on the door broke her concentration. Marcus leaned in. "You should go home. You've done enough for your first day," she chuckled softly. "This is home, apparently." He hesitated, studying her face. "You know, people think revenge and rebuilding are the same thing. They're not. One burns, the other builds." "I'm not burning anything," she said. "I'm planting new ground," he nodded once. "Then I hope you like what grows." When he left, Evelyn walked to the window. The city glowed beneath her, streets slick with rain, lights reflected in the river, Portland alive with possibility. She removed her wedding ring, the thin circle of gold catching one final flash of light before she set it in her drawer. The skin beneath was pale, unmarked. It wasn't victory she felt, it was reclamation. The woman who had once stood in a conference room with her dignity stripped now stood at the top of a different building, with the entire skyline spread beneath her. But even as triumph hummed in her veins, a quiet thought whispered in the back of her mind: power doesn't heal, it replaces. And somewhere downtown, in the collapsing glass fortress of Cascade Marketing, the people who had underestimated her were learning that lesson too. 6 months later, Evelyn stood backstage at the Oregon Convention Center, fingertips grazing the edge of the podium notes she'd written the night before. The hum of 1,000 conversations filled the air beyond the curtain. She could smell the faint sweetness of hotel coffee and the dry scent of new carpet, a cocktail of nerves and anticipation. A woman with a headset poked her head around the corner. "You're up in 2 minutes, Ms. Carter. They're all here for you, all here." The Pacific Northwest Marketing Summit, an annual gathering of executives, analysts, and creatives, had invited her as keynote speaker. The invitation email had read, "We'd be honored if you'd share your story about leadership, resilience, and reinvention." Reinvention. Evelyn smiled at the word. It made survival sound glamorous. As she peeked through the curtain, rows of industry leaders filled the auditorium, faces tilted toward the stage. And there, 7 rows back on the left, she saw him. Graham. His hair had gone grayer at the temples. His once expensive suit hung a little loose on his frame. He looked older, not in years, but in defeat. The sight hit her with the force of a wave she hadn't expected. Her pulse jumped. She turned away, forcing herself to breathe evenly. She wasn't that woman anymore, the one who'd stood shaking in a glass-walled conference room, clutching a portfolio that had suddenly meant nothing. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer said through the speakers, "please welcome our keynote speaker, Director of Strategic Marketing at Apex Global, Evelyn Carter." The applause was thunderous. As she stepped onto the stage, the lights were bright, blinding almost, but she lifted her chin. "2 years ago," she began, "I believed that hard work guaranteed recognition. That if you were excellent, fair, and loyal, the system would reward you." She paused, letting the silence fill with the unspoken, but it did. "I was wrong," she said simply. "Because systems are run by people, and people reward what mirrors them, not necessarily what deserves it." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "I learned that lesson the hard way. I lost a job I loved. I lost people I trusted. And for a while, I lost myself. But here's the truth no one tells you: losing everything can be the best education you'll ever get." She walked slowly across the stage, the spotlight following. "Meritocracy doesn't happen by accident, it's something we have to build and defend. And sometimes, to do that, you have to stop playing by rules designed to keep you small." Applause erupted, spontaneous and rising like a tide. In the front row, a young woman wiped her eyes. Evelyn saw her and smiled. "And here's the good news," she continued. "You can start over. You can rebuild. The glass ceiling isn't unbreakable, it's just loud when it shatters." Laughter, then another round of applause. She felt something inside her ease, a weight she hadn't realized she was still carrying. When her 45 minutes were up, the standing ovation lasted long enough to blur the edges of her composure. As she stepped off stage, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Evelyn, it's me. 5 minutes of your time. Please, Graham. For a moment, she considered ignoring it. But curiosity, familiar, dangerous, won out. She found him waiting near the exit, looking smaller than she remembered. Congratulations, he said, voice hoarse. You were incredible up there, thank you, she replied coolly. He swallowed. Cascade has gone. The board forced us to sell. I just wanted you to know I'm sorry. She studied him, the man who once held her future in his hands, now standing in the ruins of his own. I don't need your apology, she said softly. But I hope you learn from it, he nodded, eyes glistening. I don't think I'll ever stop. As she turned to leave, the hum of conversation from the lobby washed over her again. Her heart was steady. For the first time in a long time, she felt not anger or triumph but peace. She walked toward the light streaming through the glass doors, the sound of applause still echoing faintly behind her, a reminder of how far she'd come and how much higher she could still climb. 3 weeks after the marketing summit, Evelyn sat across from Marcus Whitman in his corner office at Apex Global. The late afternoon light poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long gold bars across the conference table. Marcus's expression was unreadable as he closed the folder in front of him. I have something unusual for you, he said finally. An opportunity or maybe a test, Evelyn leaned forward. You have my attention, he slid the folder across the table. A familiar logo stared back at her, Cascade Marketing Group. Her pulse skipped. They're bankrupt, Marcus said. Client losses, bad press, mismanagement. Their board is desperate. We've been approached about an acquisition. Evelyn stared at the folder, her old life reduced to a handful of documents and a dying logo. You're serious, completely, he said. You know their accounts, their infrastructure, their weaknesses better than anyone. You lead the transition, her throat went dry. You want me to buy the company that betrayed me, Marcus smiled faintly. Not you, Apex. But yes, you'd be running point. And before you say no, consider this. We'd acquire their assets, absorb their clients, and fold what's left of their operations into ours. It's business, Evelyn. Clean, efficient, revenge dressed as strategy, she murmured. Call it what you want. The board approved your leadership on this. She opened the folder slowly, scanning the financials. It was worse than she'd imagined, bleeding contracts, frozen assets, 3 pending lawsuits. And the personnel list, Graham Carter still listed as CEO, Sienna Vale on temporary leave. Do it, she said finally, voice low but resolute. I'll lead it, Marcus nodded. I thought you would. 2 weeks later, she found herself back inside Cascade's glass conference room, the same one where her humiliation had begun. Only this time, she sat at the head of the table. Marcus and 2 Apex attorneys flanked her, calm and confident. Across from them sat Graham, Sienna, and what remained of their board, hollow-eyed, defensive, broken. Evelyn rested her hands on the folder in front of her. Let's make this simple, she began. Apex Global will absorb Cascade Marketing in full. We'll honor existing contracts, but we'll restructure all leadership roles. Graham's voice cracked. You can't just, I can, she interrupted smoothly. And I am, she opened the folder, sliding 2 papers across the table. Your termination agreements. Effective immediately, Sienna's face drained of color. You're firing me, I'm dissolving your position, Evelyn said. There's a difference. Graham looked at her with something between disbelief and awe. Evelyn plays. We can work something out. You don't have to, she met his eyes squarely. I'm not doing this for revenge, Graham. I'm doing it because rot spreads. And your leadership, both of you, was the infection, he swallowed hard. What happens to me, you'll receive a modest severance, she said. Enough to start over. Maybe you'll finally understand what that word means. He stared down at the paper, pen trembling in his hand. When he finally signed, it was with the shaky scrawl of a man watching his power dissolve into ink. Evelyn stood, gathering the documents. This meeting is concluded. As she turned to leave, Graham spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. You win, she paused at the doorway, then looked back over her shoulder. No, she said. I survived. There's a difference. Outside the conference room, the air smelled cleaner, somehow lighter. For the first time since that disastrous promotion meeting, Evelyn felt the balance finally reset, not tilted by emotion but restored by justice. And when the elevator doors closed behind her, she didn't look back. A year later, Evelyn Carter stood by the tall windows of her corner office at Apex Global, the city of Portland glittering beneath her like a constellation of second chances. The air was clear that morning, the kind of crisp Pacific Northwest clarity that seemed to sweep away old ghosts. Her assistant David tapped lightly on the open door. "Morning, MS. Carter. The board meeting's at 10. And he hesitated, smiling. "Your daughter's waiting in reception," Evelyn's expression softened. "Send her in." Chloe walked in a moment later, balancing an oversized tote and a coffee she'd clearly spilled down one side of the cup. Her hair was shorter now, her posture confident, her ID badge reading Apex Global Junior Strategist. "You're late," Evelyn teased gently. "I inherited that from you," Chloe said, grinning. "Besides, traffic was brutal," Evelyn nodded toward the desk. "First day nerves," Chloe shook her head. "Not nerves. Excitement. You said once that if I worked here, it wouldn't be because I'm your daughter. It'd be because I earned it. That's still true." Evelyn smiled, pride blooming quietly behind her composure. "You earned this." Chloe took in the office, the clean lines, the awards on the wall, the faint hum of power that filled the room. "You ever think about it?" she asked. "Cascade, everything that happened." Evelyn turned toward the window. "Sometimes," she admitted. "Not with regret, though. More like remembering a storm that taught you how to build stronger walls." They were interrupted by a soft knock. Marcus Whitman stepped in, his usual calm authority wrapped in a smile. "Sorry to intrude, but the board has approved the expansion plan." And he paused, eyes gleaming. "They'd like to formally welcome you as Apex's newest chief marketing officer," Chloe gasped. "Moms," Evelyn blinked, caught off guard despite everything. "CMO," Marcus nodded. "You earned it, Evelyn." Every bit of it. For the first time in a long while, she couldn't find words. She simply reached out and shook his hand. "Thank you," she said, steady but moved. After he left, Chloe grinned. "You're incredible, you know that," Evelyn laughed quietly. "I just learned to stop letting other people define my limits." They worked side by side that afternoon, mother and daughter, strategist and visionary, crafting a campaign for a hotel brand expanding into Europe. Evelyn watched Chloe present ideas with a natural confidence that reminded her of herself before life had hardened the edges. Late in the day, as the city lights blinked to life, Chloe leaned back and said, "You realize you're someone's story now, right? The woman who rebuilt everything." Evelyn smiled, looking out at the skyline. "If that's true, then I hope my story teaches something simple, that walking away isn't failure. Sometimes it's strategy." Her phone buzzed with a new email alert. A young marketer named Grace Thompson had written, "I read your story. I'm in a toxic job where I'm being pushed out. How did you know when to leave?" Evelyn hesitated, then began typing. "You'll know when staying costs you more than leaving. Don't waste your brilliance proving your worth to people determined not to see it. Build somewhere that celebrates it instead." She hit send, leaned back, and exhaled. Outside, the river caught the last light of the evening, its surface rippling with gold. Evelyn didn't feel triumphant or vindicated, just steady, grounded, real. She'd learned that success wasn't about revenge or titles. It was about freedom, the kind that comes from knowing exactly who you are and refusing to shrink again. Her reflection glimmered faintly in the window, the skyline rising behind her like proof. She smiled. "They built their empire on silence," she murmured. "I built mine on truth," and for the first time the city felt entirely hers.